Hello? Hello? This thing on? Can y'all hear me? All right. Well, good morning, everybody. Today we're going to be taking a look at Genesis chapter 24, where we see Abraham send a servant to find a wife for Isaac. So starting in verse 1 there, now Abraham was old, well advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to his servant, the oldest of his household, who had charge of all that he had, put your hand under my thigh, that I may make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven, the God of earth, that you will take a wife for my son from the daughters, not from the daughters of the Canaanites among whom I dwell, but will go to my country and to my kindred and take a wife for my son Isaac. So in chapter 23, we saw the death of Sarah. We saw Abraham purchase a plot to bury her, and then after that, they found themselves without a matriarch for the family. So after presumably taking some time to mourn Sarah, Abraham turns his thoughts to the promise that God has given him, that he would be the father of great kings and nations through the lineage passed down through Isaac. So now Abraham is determined that it's time for Isaac to have a wife with which he may be able to carry on the lineage. And it makes sense that as he is aging, Abraham also wishes to see the next step of his lineage be carried out. As it was common among tribal leaders of the day, he wants this to come from his family, not from the Canaanites where he's living. And one thing that often stands out in this passage that may be somewhat strange to us is the request to have the servant place his hand under Abraham's thigh. Now, we do only see this twice in the Bible, and both times it comes from Abraham. Does anybody know why that is, or have an idea of why that is? At that time, the thigh was tied closely to the loins, and with God's promise having to do with the seed of Abraham, hand. Is my mic cutting in and out? It sounds like it is to me. Okay. All right. Sorry about that. The thigh was tied closely to the loins, and with God's promise having to do with the seed of Abraham, it meant that placing the hand under the thigh was a way of acknowledging the covenant that was established between God and Abraham and the responsibility of those parties to uphold their sides of the covenant. Abraham also requested that the servant not look for a wife among the Canaanites where he was living, but instead he go to the place of Abraham's birth. So this was not uncommon at the time to see leaders look for wives for their children among their own families. It helped kind of propagate the line, help it go from that way. But specifically with Abraham here, he has the added weight of his covenant with God. There was likely some fear that if Isaac married a Canaanite woman, he may be tempted away from his faith in God. So picking back up in verse 5, the servant said to him, perhaps the woman may not be willing to follow me to this land. Must I then take your son back to the land from which you came? Abraham said to him, see to it that you do not take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from the land of my kindred, and who spoke to me and swore to me, to your offspring I will give this land, he will send his angel before you, and you shall take a wife for my son from there. But if the woman is not willing to follow you, then you will be then you will be free from this oath of mine. Only you must not take my son back there. So the servant put his hand under the thigh of Abraham, his master, and swore to him concerning this matter. Now the servant asks what I would consider a reasonable question. If I go and I find a woman who's willing to marry Isaac, but she's not willing to come back here, do I take Isaac to her? And Abraham responds in no uncertain terms. He says, no, Isaac is not to leave the land of Canaan. Now in chapter 15, God promised the land from the river of Egypt to the Euphrates, which encompasses Canaan and some other areas, to Abraham. Abraham's birthplace was in Mesopotamia, which is not in this region. And Abraham might have believed that if Isaac went to live outside the promised land, that might be a breach of the covenant that he had with God. Abraham also says that God will send an angel before the servant, and he reiterates that the servant is to bring a wife from the land of his birth. Now, we've seen throughout his life that Abraham has faith in God and his promises, even if he does laugh at the occasional promise that God makes him. But we know that Abraham's righteousness is attributed to his faith. And it may seem a little strange that Abraham would give the servant an out, that, hey, you can be free from this oath if the woman doesn't choose to come back. My personal belief is that that was more for the servant's benefit, to give him peace of mind that if he fails on his mission, he's going to be free from it. But either way, we see the servant begin his journey. In verse 10, then the servant took 10 of his master's camels and departed, taking all sorts of choice gifts from his master, and he arose and went to Mesopotamia, to the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel down outside the city by the well of water at the time of evening, where the women go out to draw water. And he said, O Lord, God of my master Abraham, please grant me success today and show steadfast love to my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by this spring of water, and the daughters of the men of the city are coming out to draw water. Let the young woman to whom I say, please let down your jar that I may drink, and who shall say, drink, and I will water your camels. Let her be the one whom you have appointed for your servant Isaac. By this I shall know that you have shown steadfast love to my master. Before he finished speaking, behold, Rebekah, who was born of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, the wife of Nahor, Abraham's brother, came out with her water jar on her shoulder. The young woman was very attractive in appearance, a maiden whom no man had known, and she went down to the spring, filled her jar, and came up. The servant ran to meet her and said, please give me a little water to drink from your jar. She said, drink, my lord. And she quickly let down her jar upon her hand and gave him a drink. When she had finished giving him a drink, she said, I will draw water for your camels also until they have finished drinking. So she quickly emptied her jar into the trough and ran again to the well to draw water, and she drew for all his camels. The man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey or not. That was quite a chunk, so we can work through that. Here we see the servant begin his journey by loading up with camels and choice gifts from Abraham's possessions. And he makes a beeline to the well outside of Nahor. And wells are areas that we see several times in the Bible where relationships are formed. They were areas that held a lot of great importance in this region. It's an arid region, so there wasn't a lot of water out there. This is where people went to get life-giving water. They also acted as natural places for socialization. And in a lot of the stories that we see in the Bible pertaining to wells, we see people display positive qualities like hospitality and kindness. So now that the servant is at the well, he's got a bit of a problem. How do I identify who is the right person or who's the right woman for Isaac? And what does he do when he needs an answer? That's it. He prays. He goes to God in prayer. And he says, Lord, I'm here at this well. Let the woman who I ask for water, that says, not only will I give you water, I will water your camels also, let her be the one that you have appointed for Isaac. Before he's done with that prayer, God provides. Rebekah comes in. And what is interesting, or there's something I personally find interesting, I want to see if anybody else thinks the same way I do, but what is interesting about her offer to water the camels until they finish drinking? What's that? That's it. Camels, what she said was, and that's exactly what I was thinking. Camels drink a lot of water. A camel, I looked this up because I was curious. After a long journey, which this would have been, a camel can drink up to 25 gallons of water, times 10. So up to 250 gallons of water, she would have been expecting to draw from the well. That takes a lot of work. Now, it's another reason I find it kind of funny that saying the man gazed at her in silence to learn whether the Lord had prospered his journey. So he gazed at her while she filled 250 gallons worth of water. But we don't know exactly how much that would have taken because we don't know how big her jar was. But she's probably not carrying around a 50-gallon drum, so it's likely going to take a lot of drips. They were 20 gallons? So 20 camels? 10 according to Yep. So yeah, that's where you get that 250 gallons. That's a lot of water. Do-do-do-do. Now, picking back up there in verse 2, when the camels had finished drinking, the man took a gold ring weighing a half shekel and 2 bracelets for her arm weighing 10 gold shekels, and said, "Please tell me whose daughter you are. Is there room in your father's house for us to spend the night?" She said to him, "I am the daughter of Bethuel, the son of Milcah, whom she bore to Nahor." She added, "We have plenty of both straw and fodder, and room to spend the night." The man bowed his head and worshipped the Lord, and said, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who has not forsaken his steadfast love and faithfulness toward my master. As for me, the Lord has led me in the way to the house of my master's kinsman." Then the young woman ran to her mother's house, or ran and told her mother's household about these things. So here we see the servant, once he realized that God has prospered his way, what's the first thing he does? He gives thanks. He worships God for helping his trip be successful up until this point. Now, in verse 29 there, Rebekah had a brother whose name was Laban. Laban ran out toward the man to the spring. As soon as he saw the ring and the bracelets on his sister's arm and heard the words of Rebekah, his sister, "Thus the man has spoke to me," he went to the man, and behold, he was standing by the camels at the spring. He said, "Come in, O blessed of the Lord. Why do you stand outside? For I have prepared the house and a place for the camels." So the man came to the house and unharnessed the camels and gave straw and fodder to the camels, and there was water to wash his feet and the feet of the men who were with him. Then food was set before him to eat, but he said, "I will not eat until I have said what I have to say." And he said, "Speak on." Oh, Laban. Next week, when Connor's up here teaching, we're going to learn a little bit more about Laban and who he is. But with that foreknowledge, I want you to kind of keep some things in mind as we're talking about this here. It may seem a little bit strange that Laban was the one that went out to meet the servant instead of Bethuel. There's an idea that Bethuel was in poor health either due to age or infirmity. We don't know, but it's a little bit weird that the brother went out instead of the father there. But Laban, as I said, Connor will give you a little more insight next week. Laban's an interesting guy, to say it the least. And when he sees all of these gifts that Rebekah has received from the servant, I can't help but picture him like a cartoon with big dollar signs popping out in his eyes, because that seems to be what motivates Laban quite a bit. And the thing about it is, we don't know exactly what an equivalent value of the gold that Rebekah received would be today. It's hard to determine, but it's widely regarded that it's quite a sum of money. Okay. And at this point, Rebekah's family is really rolling out the red carpet for the servant and the people with him. They're preparing the house for him. They're giving him a place to stay. They're giving him a meal, and they are getting ready to have this conversation about potential marriage. And one thing that I think really shows the character of the servant and shows the regard with which he held the oath that he made with Abraham is the fact that after a long journey, after he has been traveling for a long time, he has this meal set out in front of him. In the grand scheme of things, he's already planning to stay the night. So they're planning on being there. A couple of hours to enjoy a meal and then have the conversation about marriage probably wouldn't have hurt anything. But he says, due to, again, who he is and to his respect to the oath, he says that before we eat, I want to say what I've come here to say. And so they tell him to speak on. In 34, he said, "I am Abraham's servant. The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become great. He has given him flocks and herds, silver and gold, male servants and female servants, camels and donkeys. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore a son to my master when she was old. And to him he has given all that he has. My master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house and to my clan and take a wife for my son.' I said to my master, 'Perhaps the woman will not follow me.' But he said to me, 'The Lord before whom I have walked will send his angel with you and prosper your way. You shall take a wife for my son from my clan and from my father's house. Then you will be free from my oath when you come to my clan. And if they will not give her to you, you will be free from my oath.' I came today to the spring and said, O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, if now you are prospering the way I go, behold, I am standing by the spring of water. Let the virgin who comes to draw water, to whom I say, please give me a little water from your jar to drink, and who will say to me, drink, and I will draw from your camels also, let her be the woman whom the Lord has appointed for my master's son. Before I had finished speaking in my heart, behold, Rebekah came out with her water jar on her shoulder, and she went down to the spring and drew water. I said to her, please let me drink. She quickly let down her jar from her shoulder and said, drink, and I will give your camels drink also. So I drank, and she gave the camels drink also. Then I asked her, whose daughter are you? She said, the daughter of Bethuel, Nahor's son, whom Milcah bore to him. So I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her arms. Then I bowed my head and worshiped the Lord and blessed the Lord, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me by the right way to take the daughter of my master's kinsman for his son. Now then, if you are going to show steadfast love and faithfulness to my master, tell me, and if not, tell me that I may turn to the right hand or to the left. Then Laban and Bethuel answered, the thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. Behold, Rebekah is before you. Take her and go, and let her be the wife of your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. So after recounting his story to Bethuel and Laban, the servant essentially asked them, is this going to work? Does this make sense for you? And I love their response, where they say, the thing has come from the Lord. We cannot speak to you bad or good. They're saying, this is God's plan. It is not up to us to determine if it's right. This is clearly what God has put in motion. This is clearly what he wants. This is clearly his will, so let it be. And then picking up in 52, when Abraham's servant heard their words, he bowed himself to the earth before the Lord. And the servant brought out jewelry of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah. He also gave to her brother and to her mother costly ornaments. And he and the men who were with him ate, and they spent the night there. When they arose in the morning, he said, send me away to my master. Her brother and her mother said, let the young woman remain with us a little while, at least 10 days. After that she may go. But he said to them, do not delay me, since the Lord has prospered my way. Send me away that I may go to my master. They said, let us call the young woman and ask her. And they called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? She said, I will go. So they sent Rebekah away to their sister and her nurse and Abraham's servants and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, our sister, may you become thousands of 10,000s, and may your offspring possess the gate of those who hate him. Now, can anybody here really blame Rebekah's family for asking for a few more days with her? At this time, they likely suspected they'd never see her again. So it's only natural. I don't personally think there was anything wrong with them asking. Don't think it was a bad thing in any way. They just wanted a little more time with their daughter and sister to say goodbye to her. But the way that the servant saw it there, God had blessed his way. God had guided him. It was clearly being led by God. He wanted to go ahead, go back to his master, Abraham, and have his oath fulfilled. So eventually, they turn it over to Rebekah, let her make the decision, and she says she's ready to go. Does anybody find anything interesting in the blessing that they give to Rebekah? It sounds a lot like the covenant. It definitely alludes and is in the same line as the covenant that God gave to Abraham there, where it's talking about, may you become thousands of 10,000s. It's talking about the propagation of the line and bringing everyone out from that point. Now, picking up in verse 61 there, then Rebekah and her young women arose and rode on the camels and followed the man. Thus the servant took Rebekah and went this way. Now Isaac had returned from Beer-lahai-roi and was dwelling in the Negeb. And Isaac went out to meditate in the field toward evening. And he lifted up his eyes and saw, and behold, there were camels coming. And Rebekah lifted up her eyes And when she saw Isaac, she dismounted from the camel and said to the servant, "Who is that man walking in the field to meet us?" And the servant said, "It is my master." So she took her veil and covered herself, and the servant told Isaac that all the things that he had done. Then Isaac brought her into the tent of Sarah his mother, and took Rebekah, and she became his wife, and he loved her. So Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. Does anybody know why Rebekah covered herself with a veil after she learned that it was Isaac that they were approaching? Cultural. That's one of the big points there. So at that time, wearing that veil was seen of a sign of modesty and a reservation for a future husband. It was also seen as a public declaration that she was intending to enter into the marriage, and basically signified the transition into being a married woman. Now, Isaac bringing Rebekah into Sarah's tent was to symbolize, after Sarah's death, like I mentioned before, the position of matriarch was vacated for them. So it was to symbolize Rebekah taking over that role from there. And it was a way to help get her established in that new position. Now, that actually wraps up chapter 24. Connor is going to be talking next week about Isaac and Esau. So any thoughts, any questions on chapter 24 there? We have a few minutes left. It was a cultural thing at that point too. Not in what I found, anyway. She was asking if there's any significance to it being a nose ring itself. And please, if I'm wrong, somebody correct me. But in the study that I didn't see anything particularly pertaining to the nose for a marriage ceremony. Anything else? Yes. Mm-hmm. That's actually an excellent point there. But again, to my mind, that's what I was going to say. To my mind, it leads to the whole God paved the way for this to happen. God clearly had Rebekah picked out for Isaac. Um, sure. That, that it was her instead of the servants. Yeah, absolutely. That's an excellent point. That's something that I hadn't considered. She did offer to water the camels. We see that, as I kind of mentioned in that point there, where a lot of times in the Bible, when we see the well, we see positive attributes being displayed. That's one thing that is really highlighted for Rebekah for me in that point is her willingness to do all that work to water the camels, because again, it was a lot of water that she was drawing. And without knowing the size of the jar, we don't know how much, but it was going to be a lot of work for her. And she was willing to do it. That's all. Well, thank you all so much. Everybody have a great week.